prior to the introduction. I'm going to start here on the dais reading the annual budget letter, and then Ms. Jennings and myself will lead the presentation with our PowerPoint. So if I may, I've got a rather lengthy budget letter this year, but I think it's important that we cover some of these topics. So, dear Mr. President and members of Council, as required by Title IX, Chapter 70 of the Delaware Code, I respectfully submit the proposed annual budget for Sussex County's fiscal year 2023. The FY23 proposed budget was developed by the County Administrator, the Finance Director, COO, and the Deputy Finance Director. This recommended budget was drafted after receiving submissions from county departments. We greatly appreciate their efforts and the efforts of the directors and their staff in assisting us in producing a balanced budget. Like so many organizations in today's economy, Sussex County is attempting to manage a volatile financial environment. The economic constraints, including rising inflation, supply chain limitations, are having an effect on the county. Yet local activity, including the residential building market and the demand for county services, remains at an all-time high. As a result of these and other factors, the development of the FY23 budget was one of the most difficult in recent years. While the real estate market remains very healthy, we are beginning to see the building-related activity taper slightly. The county experienced a record-breaking year for building permits in FY21 and is now seeing a decrease in activity in FY22 as it comes to a close. As such, the county is projected to process 8% fewer permits in FY23 as compared to 22. However, the baseline for the building market continues to outpace by 18% the last peak, which was in 2006. So while the year-to-year activity is trending down, the market baseline remains in an overall strong position. The fiscal 2023 total budget is $294.1 million, which represents an overall increase of $16.1 million. Unfortunately, the increase is being driven by inflation, with cost drivers being fuel, insurance, equipment, utilities, and supplies. And as a result of these monumental increases, we had to make the fiscally prudent decision to exclude new initiatives and limit purchases to constrain the county's already expanding budget. We reviewed the county's charges for services and meticulously trimmed any unnecessary spending. These efforts allow the county to continue to provide the services its residents and visitors come to expect, while not passing on to the taxpayers the additional costs of general operations. The county receives the bulk of its revenue each year from both property taxes and realty transfer taxes, known as RTT, with RTT being the largest revenue source. In recent years, the use of RTT funding has grown to the point where RTT previously accounted for under 25% of the county's revenue, and this year it is approaching 40%. This is a trend the county needs to address as we look to the future. Relying on RTT collection for operations presents a risk due to the volatile nature of the funding. In this year's budget, RTT is $7.9 million beyond FY22's original budget and is approximately 60% of what was collected in FY21. And while our trends show that the FY23 amount is a short-term attainable level, it remains at a level that is above what was actually collected only 6 years ago. And although RTT is our single greatest source of revenue, it is limited to the county's most critical services, including paramedics, fire and ambulance companies, police, 911 dispatchers, economic development, assessment, and public works. Thus, we continue to keep pace with the population and the demand for our critical services through the use of RTT. However, should RTT drop below anticipated levels, it is likely at some point in the future the county will need to seek additional revenue from the taxpayers. Although Sussex County is realizing additional revenue now, it is important to note that most of the revenue could be affected by economic factors out of our control. The pandemic, supply chain interruptions, national labor shortages, and global inflation are prime examples. With this cautionary approach, we required a collaborative effort among the budget team and department heads to prioritize expenses that may result in long-term commitments. I want to personally thank everyone for being reasonable with their requests. Our departments always first look to improve efficiency when possible before asking for more staff. Any new project requests were scrutinized to ensure they are necessary, that they align with the county's objectives, and address long-term concerns and issues, particularly in the field of public safety. Our primary focus includes sustaining government services without adding a financial burden to our current and future residents, providing adequate services for our growing elderly population, increasing workforce housing opportunities, and fostering an environment that attracts businesses and creates jobs for our highly skilled workforce. The programs and projects funded through this budget will address these objectives involving the Excite Sussex Loan Program, the recently enacted Housing Trust Fund, and the expansion of public safety through additional staff and a new paramedic training center. To ensure that all departments are aligned with the administration and county's priorities, the budget is created with 6 organizational-wide goals that then lead into specific department operational goals. These administrative organizational-wide goals are developed with the vision of this county council and their constituents through the comprehensive plan. The county council deserves credit for its leadership and continued fiscal responsibility, which has helped build a strong foundation that has allowed this government to continue to live within its means and stay strong during economic uncertainty. In closing, although the budget is a one-year document, the proposal is created with the future in mind. From foregoing initiatives to reviewing charges for services, nothing was left unturned to combat future inflationary costs. Okay, Mr. President, that concludes my budgetary letter. We'll move down to the dais and begin the presentation in our PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a few slides to begin with, and then we'll turn the reins over to Ms. Jennings to get into the details. And as in years past, we always like to highlight the successes of the current fiscal year and the budget you approved this time last year. It was quite a year, and we have a lot to be proud of, and a lot of staff in our departments deserve a lot of the credit. I'll skim through these, but I would encourage you to review the successes of the county. This document, of course, will be available to the public to review, and all the information will be made available on our website. The first slide starts with the success that promotes public safety. Something that we should all be proud of is our paramedic services and our 911 dispatch center. Looking at this slide, we reinstituted the paramedic student program with Del Tech. We also completed the first year of the call-taking model at the 911 center, which required processing 124,792 911 calls. That's quite a substantial amount of calls. Again, just skimming through these slides. Next slide is the providing services to promote well-being, assisting 245 households with housing repairs in our community development and housing department, organized successful referendums establishing Pintail Point and North Georgetown sewer areas. You're familiar with those sewer areas that were in need of desperate help from the county. And distributed 1,690 COVID-19 home testing sites and kits, Promoting prosperity. We closed the Excite Sussex loan in the amount of $1.1 million, retaining 144 jobs to date. Continued to fund the Western Sussex Business Park, which is underway, and Phase 2 Delaware Coastal Business Park, which is also underway, finalizing the lease of a 7-acre lot at the Delaware Coastal Business Park, bringing in the number of total tenants to 4. Next slide, focusing on the providing services to promote and enrich quality of life, implementing a new tracking process for the civil ticketing complaint services, partnered with Delaware Divisional Libraries to circulate MyFiVices and Chromebooks, allowing students and employees that need computer accesses to succeed, and implemented the county's first Transportation Improvement District, TID, generating over $3.9 million in written agreements. Next slide, providing services in a personal and professional manner. Invented the permit dashboard with DelDOT to track applications and streamline communications. Recorded a total of 80,579 documents, the highest year on record, with a turnaround time of 12 minutes or less. And last success slide, providing services in a fiscally responsible manner. Completed 23 existing wastewater use agreements totaling $1.5 million, and implemented a new open checkbook software for the public to see our real-time expense reporting. As I mentioned in my budget letter, some aspects of the county's activity are seeing record-breaking numbers, and other aspects, including the building activity, are seeing some tapering off, which we will highlight today. This is a snapshot of some of the metrics that we track on a day-to-day or annual basis. You can see 2020's activity, 21's activity, and then 22's projected activity. This represents about 9 good months of activity tracking, with the rest of the remainder of the months as a projection. So constable complaints tracked down about 10%. Building code inspections just about level set at 0. Bills issued annually up by 2%. Deed documents recorded down by 11%. Register of wills revenue up by 7%. Water and sewer EDUs up by 8%. Missed utility tickets, that's our inspection activity, 3% up. Utility inspections, that's our inspections of our sewer infrastructure, down 7%. And then sewer annexations completed, up 14%. So that's a good snapshot of some of the services that we provide, but it also is a good barometer of the level of activity that we're seeing in a variety of our departments. Okay, I'll invite, one more slide. 20 years of activity. This is something we track, focused specifically on building permits and dwelling permits. As you can see, from the 2008-2009 turnaround, as things continued to increase, we're starting to project now a tapering off of some of these things that we track in the building activity realm. Building permits in blue down 8%, dwelling permits in orange down 10%, and then residential permits down 16%. That's a projected amount based on the figures that we're seeing in-house. Of course, it'll wait to be seen how it actually pans out, but that's how this budget was created, with that projection in mind. Okay, now I'll invite our Finance Director and COO, Ms. Jennings, to go over more details. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of council. We're going to go into the details of the budget. So as Mr. Lawson mentioned, the budget is increasing 16.1%, or $16.1 million. You're going to hear a lot of inflation, the word inflation, public safety in this budget. We're not protected as a government from inflationary costs, and you see this throughout the budget. As those costs increase, we're going to see it in the budget. So some of the revenue highlights: there is no proposed tax increase in this budget. We are using reserves to balance the budget, most of those reserves being realty transfer tax. So $32.4 million in total reserves being used, where everything but $2 million is being used as RTT reserves. I do want to point out, as you can see, that the budget has increased on the other side close to $8 million. Our tax revenue is only up $602,000. Now, that is a 4% increase, so with the building that is occurring, we do get improvements on the tax records, but with our tax rate so low, the dollar amount is not significant, so that's $602,000. Where we do see larger increases are on the building related revenue side. We are increasing that revenue $2.5 million, or 21%. The largest increase to support this budget is RTT of 7.9%, and that is a 31.7% increase over last year's budget. We will talk about changing some fees and fines on the next few slides. You'll see that there'll be increases in our water and sewer rates. There will be some decreases in some of our assessment areas as new customers are coming on. On the expense side, the highlights that I wanted to point out, and I do want to take note that if you see those bullets there, most of it has to do with public safety. Even the IT equipment purchase, part of that is public safety as well. So we do have an additional trooper through the MOU with the state of Delaware being funded through this budget. So as you recall, we fund currently 22 additional troopers over the state of Delaware allotment. This would put another trooper on the county side, with the state contributing another trooper on their side, and the plan is to do this for 3 years total, so this year and the next 2 years. There are some improvements to the EOC building. There's some equipment replacements for the paramedics, and like I said, there's some IT equipment purchases. We do have an increase in public safety support overall in this budget. That does equate to over $4.5 million between new employees. If you add the additional grant funding, we're getting over $5 million of increased support in public safety. And then the cost drivers all have to do with inflation. Again, as Mr. Lawson mentioned, we're not taking on large initiatives this year. We did have an opportunity to purchase new software, things like that, but we've had to hold off to make sure that we can cover the current costs with the inflation. So we do have employment cost, repair and maintenance contracts are going up, the reassessment project, this is be our first full entire year of the reassessment project, so that increases. And we're seeing a cost in our insurance, whether that's liability, cyber, vehicle, workers' comp, insurance overall. We're seeing that the market's increasing there. And of course, just like everybody is, personally seeing utilities, especially fuel, going up. Okay, now we're going to go into the details, specifically into the general fund revenue. So what I wanted to do here is show you how much that we are starting to rely on real estate transfer tax. What these pie charts, the smaller pie charts on the right, show you what we did budgeted last year. So we relied on 32% of RTT to balance the budget in 22. We did amend the budget. We did have money come in that was more than what we budgeted for RTT. So then we amended the budget. So that increased the amended budget portion of RTT. But then when you look at the bigger chart, you can see that RTT we're relying on operations at 38%. And as Mr. Lawson mentioned, I do remember at times preparing this budget over the years where this was under taxes, under a quarter of our support. Okay, building related revenue, as I mentioned before, we are increasing the revenue, the building related revenue that we're supporting for the operational budget. And you will see it's increased $2.5 million. Even though we're increasing it, it is still 80% of our 2022 projections. And I do want to point out the huge fluctuation and the increases that we are seeing over time. So in 2020, this amount here was $12.9 million. This is $19.6 million. We budgeted 12, and now we're budgeting $14.5 million. Okay, which is higher than 2020's $12.9 million that we actually collected. Okay, moving on to real estate transfer tax. So you can also see here how it's changed over time. We have $32.8 million in the budget. In 2018, we had collected $32.3 million. So we are above what we are supporting in this budget is higher than what was collected in 2018. And to put it in perspective, I look back, in 2018, we budgeted $20.1 million at that time to use RTT to balance the budget. The last peak was in $36.3 million, and we had seen it go down to $13.1 million. So we have to track this and understand that this is not a revenue source that we can rely on year after year. Okay, so what are we using RTT to balance this budget? So I also wanted to give you a little bit of history. So the 2021 budget, it was 100% public safety. We move into 22, we've added economic development and public works. We did have the law change, so now that we're able to support the reassessment project and the assessment cost with RTT, we have now expanded our RTT use from public safety with economic development, public works, and assessment. Okay, our use of reserves. So year after year, people note that we're building up our reserves. Well, it needs to be noted that those reserves are restricted reserves, and that's what this chart does. So the blue line is our restricted amount of money. And we do plan on using some of that restricted money of $28.7 million in this year's budget. But what is important that we need to note is the orange line. That's the unassigned assigned. These are our tax dollars. And need to note, in 2018, starting in 2018, we're starting to spend those savings. So we're not collecting money and putting it in the bank when it comes to our property taxes. We also, I want to note, in 2023, we are planning on using $917,000 in this year's budget. Okay, going on to the fees. So the first one is fines in the libraries. So it was brought to my attention that the independent libraries and the library board had voted that they wanted to change the fine structure. So right now it is 10 cents for books and $1 for DVDs. Their recommendation is just put to 25 cents for everything. This is not a revenue generator or anything like this. This is just to be consistent among all the libraries, because you can return your book anywhere in the county, so it makes sense for all of our fees to be the same. So I told them I had to hold off, wait till the budget, present this to council. So this budget is when it would make that change, and then the rest of the independent library boards will follow suit. Okay. The next is the special event fee. This fee has not changed since 2018, and because of rising costs, particularly employment costs of our public safety, I felt it was time to look at that special event fee. And again, we do not charge a special event fee to any event that doesn't charge fees to the participants. But currently, we are charging $60. I'm making a recommendation to go to $75 for a paramedic, and with EOC for $40 to $50.
Is that per hour?
It's per hour, yes. Per hour, per medic.
Yeah.
All right. The next largest charges for services change is planning and zoning. So I have a snapshot here of what charges I'm recommending change, but if you go into the digital budget book under charges for services for general fund, you will see an entire PDF of all the charges that I am making recommendations. And what I'm doing here is trying to adequately cover some of the costs for these requested services. So instead of passing it on to the taxpayer, actually pass it on to the people using the service. This does not change building permits. You come in, you get a shed, anything like this. We're talking about, for most part, the development. And as you can see, some of the fee structure, so minor subdivision 1 to 5 is what a minor subdivision is. We're still not going to charge for the very one change, the one added minor subdivision. But if you have more lots, we are going to increase that. There's a new charge of $200 plus $20 per lot. You can see there's been some things that we haven't charged in the past that we're looking to charge to help cover, like I said, cover our costs here. But the major changes are our conditional use, our major subdivision applications. It's the development side of things. Okay, moving on to the expenses. So this pie chart is our expenditures by function. So you can see our largest expenditure up here, what you kind of do that is public safety. Now these are our internal departments, EOC and paramedics. Okay, grant and aid would be the next largest. There's public safety in that as well. If I were to pull out the public safety portion of the grant and aid and put it up to other public safety, our pie chart would look slightly different, and it would be 45% is our tax dollars are going to public safety. So that is our biggest function that we do support. General government is council, administration, anything to run day-to-day operations. And the libraries, go around a little bit, as the 3 libraries that we own. The other independent libraries that we fund of $2.8 million, that is also in the grant and aid section. All right. This is taking the same type of expenditures on the previous slide and cutting it up differently. This is looking at our expenditures category, and you'll see that our largest costs are our employees at 49.7%. What's important to note, inflation is hitting us everywhere in every part of this pie chart. So employment costs are relatively the same percentage. It was 49.1 last year. You'll see some other small changes, but overall this pie chart looks very similar to last year. Okay. With that said, that little bit of change in our employment costs have to do with new positions being added. And we do have 16 new positions being added, but the majority, 14 of those 16, have to do with public safety. In this budget, there's 4 additional dispatchers, 4 additional paramedics, starting back up the Deltec program with 6 paramedic students. We have some engineering, community development. Do want to point out that some of this is being funded with ARPA funds, which are temporary funds. Eventually, then, if these public safety employees, we choose to keep them, which I would expect that you would, we would then pay them with RTT and move them over to the general fund. So that is 8 of the positions in public safety are coming out of ARPA. The rest of them are being paid with RTT. And again, this is just full-time staff. I do have a part-time staff being added as well in economic development to help with the kitchen incubator. So this chart gives us a trend of staffing over time. And the reason we start back in 2009 is because that was the last peak of staff that we had. And you can see over time it has increased. But what is very important to note is the makeup of our staff over time, and that what we have done over this time period. So from the peak to 2014, we saw a decline in our real estate economy in the market. So we did rework our staff, offered early retirement offers. So you could see that there was a decrease in general government and building-related offices. We did automate some things. So as everything started to go up over time, so now we're at a new peak, we added 70 additional staff. But what's very important is over half of that has to do with public safety. That is stuff you cannot necessarily automate. We do have to have paramedic one-on-one patient contact. So that is where the increases have come from. It hasn't been much from the general government side because of automation. So what's really interesting is when you look at the difference between 2009 and this budget, with the change of 13, where is that 13? Well, we had 37 increase in public safety, but there's been decreases throughout. We do have one in community development. Again, that's funded through ARPA, and that position might eventually, as those ARPA funds spend away, we won't need that position going forward. So you can see it's increased 13, but the majority of it, again, is public safety. So where we were able to make a cut back in 2014 and cut some of those building-related offices, if we start seeing a decline after 2023, the question is, where will we be able to cut? Because majority of them are public safety at this time. All right, grant and aid. So this was a large percentage of our expenses next to personnel. And you can see, as I mentioned, that the largest, 46%, is public safety at $10.2 million. And I'm going to go into more detail of that part of the pie chart. So I'm just going to go quickly around the rest of the chart. So the green is economic development, 16% or $3.5 million. That does include the Excite Sussex loan that you've approved. So the money's still there as we pull it down for businesses. The downtown development districts in the Western Sussex Business Park and Seaford is finishing up, so that there's $363,000 left in there. The libraries, again, this is the 11 independent libraries of $2.8 million. We did see an increase in their tax, so they are getting an additional $69,000 that would be distributed among the 11 of the libraries. Community assistance of $1.7 million. The largest part is the housing assistance part of that, and that's $820,000. Again, we are funding, we have the $500,000 from last year's funding for the Housing Trust Fund that gets carried over to this year until it gets spent. We have some money in there for Code Purple, and we've also kept the increased amount for the Emergency Housing Fund. Last year, if you remembered, you'd increased it to $300,000. That increased amount's still there. Human service grants are the same level. Council grants, same level as before. We have our Department of Correction trash MOU. That is in there as well. Open space, this has continued at the same amount. There is additional open space on the capital side, but this is more for our partnerships like farmland preservation or the land trust. And then the accommodations tax, not necessarily that you're going to spend it, but the money is there. We've collected about $1 million for this past year that we've collected, and then I expect another $1 million each year. So that money is there to spend it if you choose. All right, like I said, I want to go over public safety, grant and aid. There is an increase, about $1.2 million over 2022's budget. And as I mentioned, the state police is going up, and that does include an additional trooper to make that 23 troopers funded by Sussex County. Local law enforcement is staying the same. Fire and BLS, I have a note you'll see there that the Volunteer Fire Association requested that we contribute $36,400 per company to help with EMT wages and $25,500 for CAD equipment. So that is in there. The $36,400, if you total that out with the 21 and a half companies, half being Carlisle, that's $782,600. If you add the 25, that's a total increase for the ambulance fire service, $808,000. And again, I want to point out that funding for public safety does come from really transfer tax and the pass-through building permit fire service fee. All right, water and sewer funds. Water and sewer funds are very similar to general fund. They are seeing increases because of inflation. And you'll see year over year, I have 3 years of the budget here, and it has increased, and we're seeing a $6 million increase in 2023. I put what those increases are in the table aside just to show you there's really no large projects. It's just inflation. We do have debt payments, so as we're finishing projects and areas, we have to start paying that infrastructure down, and that goes through assessment fees. But for the most part, again, it's inflationary driven. And that's on the pie chart, shows you the same thing. The other financing uses, that is the largest part, and that is the debt payments on infrastructure. So how are we funding the support of this increase in the sewer fund? And it is multiple ways. First, we did forego some purchases that were requested. We're requesting an increase in the service charge of $24 a year. That's an 8.1% increase. They do get billed quarterly, so we're looking at $4 a quarter. That would bring in $2 million. We do have new connections coming on as we expand. We do have new customers. That's another $1 million. And we are increasing some use for connection fees. And connection fees can only be used for certain things, so this would be for transmission improvements. So that is how we're balancing the budget. It's a combination of using basically savings and increasing fees and new customers. So the current rate today is $296. The proposed rate is $320. And I do want to show that there is a history of us using savings over the last 3 years, and we're going to have to start knocking that down to make this a self-sustaining, supporting fund that's going to be able to survive. So we are lowering how much we're using. All right, assessment rates. So as I mentioned earlier on, assessment rates are decreasing in some areas, and the color codes I put up here is that the brown color is these areas went down last year, and the orange are going down this year. So as we continue to grow our system, this debt in each of these areas that we're able to, we do bring down. So these are decreases. We will continue to look at that year after year to see if there's any more rates that we can decrease. Okay, moving on to water. Water, very similar story to sewer. just a lot less customers to cover this cost. So even though it's going up $255,000, to cover that cost with only 3,700 customers, that's a big increase. So the major increases this year in here, same thing, inflation related. There is a contract to repair the Dewey Beach water tower. That's driving some of that, but it's repairs and maintenance and the artesian contract that we have for Ellendale. So how are we balancing the water fund? Similar to the sewer side of things, it is a combination to make this work. So we are going to use some savings. We are adding an EDU for every irrigation system. So right now we know that there's 24 that can be added there. We do have very few new connections in the Dewey area, and then Ellendale's revenue is coming on as well. We are proposing to increase the cost per EDU by $35 annually. That is a 10% increase. Fire service fee was created last year, but that is additional funds for this year. Tower rents increased. We have some additional interest we can realize. So that is how we're making this up. Again, it's a combination. Here we can see we have been using savings a lot more than we have on the sewer side, and it is continuing to increase. So I would expect that Dewey Water, the water fund, will be seeing increases year after year until we can get this proposed use of savings. They do have the savings today, but again, we can't continue to use it. Just so they do have $1.7 million of savings right now, so we're still okay with this year, but we need to start looking at continuing to increase their rates. Current rate is $342. The proposed rate would be $377. And this is a slide I've had the last couple of years just to show the biggest increase they had seen, which has driven the rates to have to go up, is the City of Rehoboth's charge to us. We purchase our water from City of Rehoboth. That price increase alone was $300,000 annually. So we did put together a plan to use some savings while trying to also raise rates to get that cost to be covered. Okay, last section is the capital section. So the general fund capital, we have new general fund capital debt. We do support general fund capital with excess realty transfer tax money that we do move over to the capital fund year after year when there is extra money. So you can see in 2023 where most of our capital is being supported by RTT. We do get some intergovernmental grants, that being from the FAA and the state of Delaware for airport projects. FAA covers 90% of eligible projects where the state covers 5%. So the pie chart shows you reserves are at 84% to support our capital. And our general fund expenditures, now in the budget book, same format as last year, very expansive on our capital projects. It goes into detail of these projects, but I have them outlined here and color-coded with the pie chart at the top right. And you can see that this year, because of property acquisitions, administration costs are higher than airport and business. Airport and business is usually the highest one. But this has to do with, if you recall, when you amended the budget last year for open space to preserve land, we have about $3 million of that money left over. So I'm moving that money over to make sure that we continue closing properties to be able to spend that. Plus, I put another $3 million in there for this year. So it's a total of $6 million of open space for purchases made by the county. And this, remember, is addition to the $1.4 million that is on the general fund side with our partners. So I'm not going to go through everything here. You can see, though, most of it, I hit the top one with the property acquisition. We do have the public safety building that should be finished this year. So the remaining phase of that building's up there at $7.3 million. And we do have a EMS station in the Millsboro area that is planned to be built as well, and that's the $1.5 million for a total capital of the $28 million. All right, water and sewer capital expenditures. Really what you see here is nothing that you haven't seen in the last 2-3 budgets, because these are ongoing improvements at our treatment plants at the top And then you have the septic remediation projects down at the bottom. The ones at the top are primarily funded with connection fees or user fees, depending on if it's expansion or compliance related. The ones below will be supported by assessment fees in those specific areas, and that makes up 47%. Those septic remediation, 47% of those capital projects are related there. And the amount of the budget hasn't changed much. It was within $50,000 of last year, as we expected, but it's a large 5-year capital aggressive plan of $173 million. So that is the summary. I'll take any questions before I read the short titles for your introduction.
Any questions, Council? Very good presentation.
Very good.
And I do want to say publicly that thank you and your staff very, very much. And I'm going to say especially you. I know you've been working weekends on your own time, weeknights on your own time, and the public has no idea how much it takes to put a budget together of this size. And this has been a very difficult year with inflationary costs and things going up. It's been tough. And I think we all take your point that this currently, if things continue, is not sustainable without doing something else as far as finding more revenue from somewhere. But thank you for all you've done, Gina. I mean that sincerely. Thank you. We appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
If you read your short title.
Sure. I have 3 of them.
Yes, you do.
The first one is an ordinance establishing the annual operating budget for fiscal year 2023.
Anybody choose to introduce it? I'll introduce it. Mr. Riley, introduce it. Next.
Okay. And before I read the next one, this is the fees that are coming out of the code, and we are now putting them in the budget. So the building fees related, we decided it should be better in the budget instead of having our fees throughout the code. And this way, it gives an opportunity to look at them year after year. So that's what this one will do. An ordinance to amend Chapter 62, Article 3, Sections 62-7 and 62-8B, and Chapter 99, Sections 99-14 and 99-39 of the Code of Sussex County relating to the establishment of fees in the annual budget.
Anyone? Mr. Riley, introduce it.
Okay. And then the third one, an ordinance establishing annual service charges, annual assessment rates for collection and transmission and/or treatment, and connection charges for all Sussex County water and sanitary sewer districts.
Anyone?
I'll introduce it.
Mr. Riley, introduce it. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jennings, very, very much. Mr. Lawson, you're still up.